And welcome back to Houston Newsmakers, where I'm joined by Dr. Nancy Beck Young, chair of the History Department at the University of Houston, where she's an expert in the study of Congress, the presidency, and electoral politics, which is perfect for our conversation today. Good morning, Dr. Young. Looks like you have a lot to talk about these days as it concerns what's going on in Congress and the presidency. I'm going to get your opinion on how you think history will look upon this time of history now and Congress as it relates to the presidency of the Trump tenure primarily.
Right. Okay. So how will historians look at Congress during the Trump presidency? I think that the first point is to differentiate between the moment during the first 2 years of the Trump presidency when Republicans controlled Congress versus the last 2 years of the of the Trump presidency when Democrats took control, into where we sit now, halfway into the Biden presidency with Democrats barely in control of Congress. So who's in control is going to matter to what historians have to say. And for the Republican period of control, Congress was pretty weak and enabling of the Trump administration, but not terribly effective with regard to passing legislation when they controlled all three branches. Congress under the Democrats has been earnest but ineffectual, and much of that has to do with structure. The Democratic control in Congress has been very narrow, so Democrats don't have the vote numbers to do big things. And when you don't have the vote numbers to do big things, you can't do big things. Right. So the Democrats look weak.
It seems to me that the elephant that will always be in the room is the former president will be remembered as having been impeached twice, the last time for his role in inciting the insurrection on January 6th. And that story is still being written, obviously, as we speak because of the January 6th committee hearings and more revelations that come up with each hearing. Now, the last hearing with Cassidy Hutchinson, the aide to Mr. Trump's chief of staff, Mark Meadows, seemed particularly damaging because she was in the room when a lot of the activity surrounding the attack on the Capitol was taking place. And I want you to listen to this because she said the former president was told that there were those in the crowd with weapons and that he seemed unconcerned.
I overheard the president say something to the effect of, I don't effing care that they have weapons. They're not here to hurt me. Take the effing mags away. Let my people in.
So how damaging is that kind of testimony and that kind of comment that she was relating, understanding there's still millions of people who are hardcore Trump supporters and they hear that?
Right. So with all due respect to American citizens who support the former president, if the Justice Department does not act to investigate and ultimately bring charges against Trump administration, Trump election committee officials for this episode, then we really will lose our democracy. We can't know for certain what did and did not happen until the matter is tested in a court of law. But there is more than enough evidence on the table to suggest that that is absolutely necessary if we want to keep being a democratic republic such as we have been for almost 250 years.
So how long does it typically take for the record of history to reflect some of the things that you're talking about? Because what you're saying is that history will say that charges were either brought or something similar to what happened as a result of the previous presidency.
Right. So what was happening on January 6th was Trump was trying to lead a coup to hold power. He did not want to leave the White House, even though he had been defeated, and he knew that he had been defeated. And that is, to say the least, highly irregular and illegal. So history will reflect that and will record that. And I think historians already know that. There have already been very fine books published. I'm thinking of a book, an edited book published by a leading historian that already tells this story. But I think the bigger question is, when will the American people understand this story? And I think that that will take some time for consensus to form that we have lived through a very dangerous moment where we nearly lost our country.
You know, there's so much divisiveness in this country. You've reflected on that. More than most people can remember. But as an historian, what does history tell us about similar divisive times in our country?
Sure. Well, and we've had probably more divisive times than unifying times. I'm thinking back just a little over 50 years ago to the McCarthy moment, when we had another bully in power. Joseph McCarthy was in the U.S. Senate, not the presidency. But he was using all of the tools available at the time to divide the country on questions of communism and loyalty to the United States. And it took about 4 years for that episode to resolve. And in the meantime, careers were ruined. Some of those careers were in Washington, D.C. and elite folks, but there were also average folks who lost their jobs because they subscribed to the wrong newspaper or listened to the wrong music or who knows what, and were loyal American citizens but got caught up in the net of McCarthyism. Probably the most significant example of divisiveness in our country, of course, is the Civil War from the middle of the 19th century. And it took about 4 years to fight, a little over 4 years to fight and ultimately win the Civil War, but a lot longer time of division before the fighting and after the fighting there. So I think if history tells us anything, we are still in the middle of this moment, and we need to be very careful that we don't go the wrong direction.
Well, you know, one of the things that I noticed about what's going on now in the January 6th committee hearings, that the committee witnesses have been mostly conservative Republicans who, at this point, it represents a time for reckoning within the Republican Party. Here's an example. Hutchinson, for one of the people, and Congresswoman Liz Cheney, the other. Listen.
It was un-American. We were watching the Capitol building get defaced over a lie.
The reality that we face today as Republicans, as we think about the choice in front of us, we have to choose, because Republicans cannot both be loyal to Donald Trump and loyal to the Constitution.
So they're fighting. There's a fight within the party for the party. What do you think our listeners should know about the cycle of political history now and how this one will be remembered?
Well, we will have to wait and see. Who gets the Republican nomination in 2024 will have a lot to do with what happens next. Even if President Biden runs, which I think he will, and even if he were to be reelected, and it's too soon to predict outcomes for 2024, we have to get through the midterms in 2022 first. But even if Biden were to be reelected in 2024, a lot of what will happen to the Republican Party will depend upon whether they nominate a Trumpist or an anti-Trumpist in that year. The fever has to burn out at some point in time, and Republicans and Democrats need to get back to the point where they're arguing about things like the marginal tax rate and trade policy with Mexico and how much support to provide to this or that domestic program versus this or that foreign program. And we're not there yet. We're still in the middle of a big argument about the legitimacy or lack thereof of Donald Trump and what happened on January 6th.
You know what? I think I remember those days when those arguments were going on. That's it. I remember that. Dr. Nancy Beck Young, thank you for our Sunday morning history lesson. We appreciate your time this morning. Thank you.